All right, we are now live. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We are, well, all joined. I have the pleasure of being joined by a friend of mine from school years ago. Her name is Heather. Heather, how are you doing today?
I'm just fine. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So, she's graciously allowed or agreed to come on the show to be interviewed. I love talking about and with people who grew up in the same environment I did of, independent fundamental Baptist movement, going to the churches, going to the schools and everything. And just, it's fascinating to me to see where people end up and their journey along the way. And that's what we have Heather along for today. So we'll begin by asking Heather if you could just introduce yourself, your background, where you grew up, and your familiarity with Christian schools.
Oh, so I grew up in the Ozarks, and that's where I still live now. And I was homeschooled until 7th grade. And my parents used a variety of curricula for those years. I think we started with Bob Jones, and then we transitioned. Every year we did something different. It seemed like, so we did Abeka, we did ACE, we did Saxon, math. I think those are the main ones. I think those are kind of the top three for everybody: Bob Jones, Abeka, ACE.
Right.
And then in 7th grade, I actually went to public school. Street cred. Yeah, it was I really expanded my vocabulary that year. And then 8th grade, I went to a Christian church school, an ACE school. And then 9th grade, I went back to public school, and 10th grade, I went back to the Christian school. So for those 4 years, I went to a school like outside of my home. And then the rest of the time after 10th grade, we did ATI for our homeschool curriculum.
That's good stuff.
Does that answer all the questions? Oh, and then college, like I went to Maranatha just like you. So
yeah, we both attended Maranatha in Wisconsin. I was going to bring up, you said you're from the Ozarks. Have you ever seen the TV show Ozark? Did you ever watch that on Netflix?
Oh, I have not seen the entire show, but I've seen like the beginning of it. Yeah. They're appropriating our culture.
It's a good show. I think there are 4 seasons, I think. And the first 2 seasons, I liked everything except the last season. It was great all the way up to the last season, but it's weird because we talked about this before, because we both grew up in Missouri. I didn't grow up around the Ozarks, but I am familiar with Missouri culture, and it's odd that people consider Missouri to be a southern state when it's not. It's a Midwestern state, but it just kind of borders on the South. And the show kind of leans into the Southern aspect a little more than is actually real in Missouri. I found that interesting.
Well, I don't know. Some people, if you say it's a Midwestern state, they're like, no, it's a Southern state. And they get really worked up about that. Like, I've seen TikToks about that. They're like, oh, you want to be part of the Midwest, but you're not. Our own region.
What the criteria is for a Southern state? I mean, I guess it is arbitrary. But
actually, speaking of Christian schools, I had to take state history at the ACE school, and we learned that we were supposed to be part of the Confederacy, the 11 Confederate states, which we had to memorize the names of for some reason. And, we learned that the reason we weren't is because the Federalist troops invaded our state capital and made us join the Union. And we have a star on the Confederate flag because there are 13 stars on the Confederate flag, but only 11 Confederate states. There's one for us and one for Kentucky. So
I didn't know that about the Union invading Missouri state capitol. I didn't know that. That's
I don't know if that's true, but
it might be. Hell,
state history paces.
Yeah, Missouri. So Missouri, if you know, was a border state during the Civil War, and essentially it meant that it was a northern state, but it still had slavery, which is kind of a fence-sitting, a weird issue there. But yeah, it does have a star on the Confederate flag. That's true. But yeah, I remember taking government because that was a requirement to graduate from high school in Missouri. I remember that you had to take a civics government class, whatever. Learned a lot about the Constitution, a lot of the absurdities and everything like that. And when I had completely forgot about Saxon because Saxon for some reason did all the math. I don't know why.
Yes.
I don't know why there was. Yeah, what was up with that?
I don't know. I did not like I didn't like any of the math curriculum.
I mean, I sucked at math for pretty much my entire life until I was like 30. So I hated it just because it was math. I don't know, but so when I was a kid, math first started bothering me in third grade. I still remember, like once we got to like long division, once we started learning that, it all fell apart for me. And I'd have to stay in during lunch. During recess, I would have to work on math all the time because I was always bombing it. And for the rest of like my academic experience in high school and college, I always struggled with math. And my dad is a math genius. And so, you know, how it's like when, you know, if Johnny has 3 apples, you know, the whole thing with kids and everything. That's kind of how he was a horrible math teacher, but he was great at math. But yeah, Saxon, did you have any videos for math when you're
No, never had any video at all. And I had friends who got to do Abeka videos, and I was so jealous. Oh, I wanted to do the video school so bad because you got to see the classroom full of children.
Yeah.
There was a real teacher at the front of the room that wasn't your mom. And not that there's anything wrong with my mom, but it seemed so fancy and and like I just wow, I was so envious of my friends who got to do the videos, but no, I didn't ever get to.
That's really funny. Mr. Calvert, I remember, did a bunch of the math, and there was this young guy that did the algebra stuff, or whatever. But I hated either way. But that's some interesting stuff. So I've been speaking to Heather over the last few days about her experience, and she introduced me to it was an organization called IBLP. Now, I had heard of this. I had heard of Bill Gothard, but I had never heard the acronym IBLP. And since she's told me about it, I've heard a lot more about it. So if you could give a synopsis of what who Bill Gothard was or is, and I don't know if he's still alive, and what IBLP stands for and what it's all about, if you could.
He is still alive. He's really old now. So IBLP stands for the Institute in Basic Life Principles, and the principles were 7 principles, the 7 basic principles that Mr. Gothard came up with for how you should live your life. And so
he knows because he's the authority on this.
He's the only one who knows too. So it's your lucky day if you get to meet him. And so most people are introduced to IBLP through something called the Basic Seminar. And the Basic Seminar is where you go through the 7 basic principles. You buy a workbook, which has a lot of, text, and then fill in the blank, like places to take notes. And the Basic Seminar is not free. You pay a fee, you go to a church, and I think it was like 3 hours a night for 5 days. And you would sit there in these 3-hour sessions, and they would, when I went anyways, because I was in like the 2000s. Mm-hmm. So it was past its zenith, I think, at that point. It had been around for a long time. So we were watching on a screen videos of Mr. Gothard giving the seminar to like these packed out stadiums. And I think my parents, I asked them when I knew this was coming up, I asked them how and when they got involved in IBLP, which almost is a misnomer because it's not like it's a club or something, but they went to their first basic seminar before I was ever born. So I don't ever remember not.
Wow.
A part of IBLP, which being a part is not really the way of saying it. ATI is like a sister organization of IBLP, and you would be a member of ATI. That's their homeschool curriculum, the Advanced Training Institute. But IBLP is just more, it's a parachurch organization. So it's not like a church where you're a member, and it's not like you pay membership dues. It just means like I went to the seminar and I liked the ideas. I probably have some of the books in my home. Like I probably am trying to like live out these teachings in my life. But you don't have to be a part of ATI to be a part of IBLP. You would need to be a part of IBLP to be a part of ATI. I don't know if that makes sense how I'm explaining it to you, or do you have any other questions about it?
No, it's all good. That's all good. It was so I grew up just a standard independent fundamental Baptist, and a lot of our teachings were, in concordance with a lot of IBLP stuff. But from what you've told me and from what I've seen about it in on other sources, it seems like a hypercharged version, even of what we had, or a lot more structured, I would say. That there weren't just guiding principles, but each guiding principle had its own subset of rules that showed you how to operate in these principles. And you told me about a documentary called Shiny Happy People that I don't think I had heard of. When I hear Shiny Happy People, that's an REM song, and that's what I thought of when you first mentioned it. Yeah, it's a I think it's REM. It is. It's an REM song from the late or early 90s or something like that. But
but I didn't know.
Okay. It's a band. You ever heard "Losing My Religion"? That's a song from way back in the day. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But it's I'll send you a link for REM. You'll see what I'm talking about. But it's that's what I first thought of, and then I watched. I didn't get to finish all. I think it was 4 episodes to it, and at least from what I saw, and I didn't get to finish all 4. I wanted to watch the whole thing before we spoke, but I did get to check out the first 2 episodes, and that was heavy on the Duggar family, which holy shit. I mean, the Duggars were weird to me even back then. It would just seem to, and it's unfortunate because I guess it's not. Whenever I see a couple with just a ton of kids, I immediately think, that's a religious extremist right there. It's the first thing that comes to mind, which is really sad because it doesn't mean that, but that's one of the
probably true.
Yeah, it's one of the familiar markings. It's like, man, like, why do you have 12 kids? This isn't 1898. Like, what's going on here? But and look, if you want to have, here's what I was wondering. I was watching the thing about, first off, the guy's name was Jim Bob. I forgot. Like, come on, are you serious? His name's Jim Bob? I guess it's like,
he's from Arkansas. So.
Yeah, and so I was wondering. I didn't think I saw in the doc like what he did for a living to like support 20 people. Like I don't remember. I saw that he
used cars.
Used cars?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know that much, but I also think they didn't have a lot of financial resources before the show, so I don't know how well he was supporting these.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, like this guy's feeding a small town like by himself. It's just super weird. And then I saw that he served in like the state house and everything, and then the show took off after that and stuff. It was some wild shit on that. And what else did I see here? I wrote down notes on this. I really wanted to speak about this with you. Well, so what was your takeaway from the Shiny Happy People documentary? I didn't put that on the list of questions, but I knew that you had brought it up before. So what are your thoughts on that in general?
Oh wow, I felt so many feelings while I was watching it. Wow, my takeaway. So I guess I felt validated, and I felt represented and seen, because, like, I've gone to therapy, of course, a lot,
Yeah.
As an adult, or like in my work, I'm a musician, and like I'll get a new student and they'll be like, oh, I want to learn how to sing this song. You know this song, right? It's incredibly famous. Everybody knows this song. And you're a music teacher. So obviously, you know it, right? Or like just like talking to my peers, they'll be like, oh, you're this old and you're from the United States, you know about this really famous show from when you were a teenager, or this cartoon or whatever. And like, I would always be like, I just would like kind of try to look at eventually, because it's just like too much to explain. I would just kind of try to like look at their faces to figure out like what reaction they were looking for from me. So I just be like, okay, this is a funny thing. Laugh. Or this is probably more serious, like, oh, like, so I know what facial expressions I could just like kind of move on and not be like, I don't know how to explain that I grew up in this weird subculture. It's going to take like a long time. But now I can just say, oh, have you seen Shiny Happy People? And a lot of times people are like, yes. And I can be like, oh, that's how I grew up. So no, I don't know this song that you're talking about. I have no fucking clue. Please just, I promise it'll be fine. I can listen to it and I'll know what to do, but I don't know what it is right now. So yeah, that was a really nice thing. And the Duggars were kind of like that too. Like once they were on TV, I could be like, oh, well, have you seen the Duggars? And people be like, yeah. And I'd be like, that's ATI. So I loved that they're on TV. I loved hearing other people's stories. It made me feel great because I'm like, I wasn't crazy. This was really, really weird.
Yeah. That's one of the more difficult aspects of growing up the way we grew up is I wasn't quite as removed from popular culture as you were. I still kind of kept tabs on everything, but trying to explain to people like the weird setup and everything is just a lot of work. It is. There's just no way you can't knock it out in like a 3-minute speech on it. You've got to go on and on and on about it. So it's like I rarely talk like in my regular life. I pretty much never talk about my college experience. I never do because it would be too confusing for anyone. Right? Like, how am I supposed to tell a story that? Yeah, my buddy in college got kicked out because he went to a movie theater. I mean, like, how are you gonna? It's like what? Yeah. It'd be 30 minutes.
They just look mystified at the end, and you're like, never mind. I went to regular college. It's fine. Never mind.
I know, right? Yeah.
It was the same as what you experienced, probably.
Yeah. It's just like boys and girls weren't allowed to hold hands or something like that. It's like you could only hold hands if you were engaged. Like there was like an engaged dating
process you had to go through.
Yeah.
Engagement ring and like all this stuff to get permission to have engaged status.
It was an actual status. Like there were rules to it and everything. And if you went on a date, you had to have a chaperone. You had to bring one of your friends along for your dates. Like it was complete nonsense. And it's difficult to talk to people about it. And one thing that I saw in the documentary that I wanted to bring up was something I believe we discussed before, because hope you guys are sitting down for this, but there's a lot of sexism in the whole. It is definitely a feature, not a bug. But they brought up something that I thought was an interesting point, because it showed that on the Duggars, you had the girls were always doing housework and washing dishes, and they were always in dresses. They always had long hair. The boys always had short hair, and they were always outside, chopping wood or, mowing the lawn or just like, and it was very gender performative. And then someone like the I don't know if you remember this, but in the documentary, they also showed that the Kardashians are the same way. Like the Keeping Up with the Kardashians show, they are also very gender performative. Like, Kim Kardashian is always just exuding as much femininity as possible, and they're different sides of the spectrum, but it's the same thing. And I was thinking about this. It has not left my mind since I watched the show, is that pretty much all media is like that. The most media is like that, hey, here's a dude, he's a spy, and he's going to be kicking ass. He's going to be knocking chicks down left and right. He's driving a fast car. Or, hey, here's this girl is a model, and men can't keep their eyes off of her and everything. I was like, actually, like being gender performative is way bigger than just like the independent fundamentalists or IBLP. We still kind of haven't grown out of that. So we make fun of them because the gender stuff they're performing is just like an old fashioned gender performing. But the stuff that we're doing today in modern culture is just a modern version of gender performance. And it really hasn't stopped.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, misogyny is rife in our culture. I think our culture at large, it's just worse in Christian fundamentalism. It's entirely unchecked. I mean, I think most people in our culture at large, most, not all, but most would say women should be allowed to vote. Like that wouldn't be controversial. Women should be allowed to drive, have a bank account, control their own money, get divorced if their partner is abusing them. But you know, in Christian fundamental, at least in my experience in Christian fundamentalism, like those things aren't always.
Yeah, so yes, I I I talked about this a couple of weeks ago on there's a guy who's running for governor in North Carolina. I think it's Mark Richardson, I think his name is. And he was talking about how, like, something I've heard plenty of times, I'm sure you have, that it's not super important to focus on allowing women to vote, or respecting women's right to vote, because back in the good old days it was one vote per family, and so women didn't worry about, which is is a stupid argument, because all right, well then let the mom vote if that's the case. First off, like, why not? If it's one vote per family, why has it got to be the dad? Second, what about like a single woman? She, like a 45-year-old woman, is still represented by her dad's vote. It doesn't make any sense at all. But it's not an uncommon point of view. Like, I'm not going to say that it is the standard point of view for conservative Christians, like an IBLP, Independent Fundamental Baptist stuff. I wouldn't say it's 53% or something like that, but it's a healthy amount. Like, I say like 25-30% easily would have no problem if women didn't have the right to vote. I mean, have you seen that in your experience?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was a majority, but I do remember that being discussed, particularly at IBLP. And I remember, and of course, this is all a really long time ago. So, but I do remember the discussion that a woman's power is her influence, and that is a different power than what a man has. So, like, your power is to like influence your husband, kind of thing, and like he'll vote, and like your influence has been like a part of that vote, so you're kind of also voting.
Did you buy that as a kid? Did you buy it? Because I gotta tell you, yeah, even back in my Christian fundamentalist days, that never made sense to me. It never did. It's like, as you're telling me, oh well, you have the power of casual suggestion. And if your husband thinks you're right, he'll agree with you. It's like, okay, well then why not just let them vote? Like, why go through this like ridiculous sideshow of saying, well, maybe you could suggest the person with actual power? And they like to hide behind this paradigm that, listen, men and women, they aren't unequal in our point of view. They just have different roles, and these different roles, like, just happen to be that the men are always the one in the top positions. But listen, for the women who have the lower positions, they're just as important. Don't get us wrong. It's that's what we're trying to do here. And I heard it. I was always kind of like a proto-feminist and like gay rights guy, even back in those days. Like, the fact that, like, their stringent opposition against like gay marriage never made any sense to me. Like, even I say, look, even if you think it's morally wrong, what do you care if someone else is getting married? Like, why are we having? I remember my preacher always had this thing where he'd say this like once a month. He'd be like, listen, I hate to be a political driven preacher. However, and he would talk about politics all the time, but he would always kind of apologize. I don't try to focus on politics when that's all he did. And I remember this would have been like, I don't know, 2004, 2006, somewhere around there. Missouri, you might remember this. Missouri had this resolution to overturn like this ancient law for the state that homosexuality was illegal. Like, it was actually a crime in the state of Missouri. And so it was put on a ballot measure. And I remember my preacher getting up saying, we've got to oppose this. We have to make sure that it's and I was like, are you kidding me? Like, are you fucking insane? But this happened all the time. I don't know. It was the bigotry against the queer community and against women was just overwhelming. And I say this all the time, that our community was racist as fuck. I mean, it was just stringently racist, but it was way worse when it came to sexism, because they were super open about it. They were kind of casual in their their racism. It was still there, but they would kind of dance around it and just find ways to like make euphemisms for it. But when it came to the sexism, it's like, no, women can't be preachers. Women can't vote in church business meetings. Women can't have positions in authority over men. I think you mentioned something like, well, we'd rather not have women leading like songs during the service. Like, they were very open about it. And I don't know how so many women put up with it. I really don't, because it's just week after week just being insulted and telling them you're inferior face to face. It's wild.
It is, but I mean, yeah, your question was like, did it bother me or did I believe it? I did believe it. I believed it was entirely appropriate, and it didn't bother me at all because I knew that was what God's plan for me was, because he had made me a woman and I was a weaker vessel. I would be easily deceived and confused compared to men, because that's what the Bible says about women. And we're the reason that there's sin in the world. So no, I had no problem with any of those teachings. I thought they were true. I believed them. I remember I was a big fan of Elizabeth Elliot, who was a missionary in Ecuador in the 1900s. And I remember her saying on her radio program one time, and I met her one time in person at an IBLP event, actually. She wasn't like a part of IBLP, but, she was obviously on board with their teachings because she was a guest speaker sometimes. But I remember her saying the voice of a woman's father or husband is as the voice of God to her. Because the Bible says if a woman makes a vow, and she obviously is making this vow because she's feeling a conviction to make this vow. So she thinks God is like leading her to make this vow, like say, I vow I'm never going to drink alcohol or something like that. I don't know if you remember this in the Old Testament, like it says, if you're not married, if your father hears of the vow, that first day he hears of it, if he says, no, you're not going to have that vow. Or if you're married, if your husband hears it and the first day he hears it, he says, no, then you're not under that vow anymore.
Oh, I know that one.
Yeah, it's a law in the Old Testament, but men don't have that. A man of any age can make a vow and it's a vow, period. And she's like, I remember her citing that as like, a source text to prove her point that like the voice of your male authority figure, which just depended on your marital status, is the voice of God for you. That's how you know what you're supposed to do. That's how God speaks to you, is through your male authority figure in your life.
Wow. I actually hadn't heard that. Wow. It's weird that I run across stuff that I hadn't heard in the Bible, but